Moving on to Australia. By now I was really getting into the swing of things in my travels, and within 48 hours of landing in Australia, I had purchased an automobile and was driving it down the eastern coast of Australia. For those of you who haven't been there, Australia is almost identical in size to the United States. So if you're going to see that country, you need to set aside quite a bit of time. There's not a whole lot in the middle of the country. You can go down the east coast and then you fly to the middle of the country, which is where Alice Springs is, and then you can go over to the east coast, but even so, you're going to need about 3 months to see all of Australia. This was taken with my iPhone. I dropped my G12 that I showed you and broke it, ironically, as I was coming out of a photography exhibit at the museum in Sydney. And so my challenge was to take some kind of a unique photo of one of the most photographed structures in the civilized world, and so that was my iPhone photograph. Here's a picture of that place that I talked about in the center of Australia. Again, one of the most iconic places in Australia, and I could have stayed there for a week. It's just incredibly beautiful, and as the light changes throughout the day, the rock changes color. It's really just a strange and beautiful place. These images are, again, fairly mundane, everyday objects, but I'm constantly looking for patterns everywhere I go. And in putting this slideshow together, it was a lot of fun to see some of these images side by side for the first time. Skyscrapers in Surfers Paradise in Australia, and mailboxes in Rockhampton. This is an area called the Pinnacles in Western Australia. I got there right at sunup, and it's just this amazing lunar landscape. There's all kind of critters in Australia that'll buzz over and bite you or sting you or jump on you, and the ones that aren't on the land are in the ocean. So they have, I think, some of the most venomous snakes in the world, and crocodiles and sharks and stinger jellyfish, so you got to be careful when you're there. This is the most western point in Australia. I climbed over the guardrail so I could actually be at the most western point. I found this guy who was playing the guitar and singing songs about love that he had composed himself, and then when he got tired of playing the guitar, he would grab some chalk from this dish and draw these amazing seascapes on the surface of the parking lot. And it was kind of nice to see how those two images went together side by side.
No changing of place at 100 miles an hour will make us one bit stronger or happier or wiser. There is always more in the world than man can see. Walk they ever so slowly, they will see it not better for going fast. The really precious things are thought and sight, not pace. It does a bullet no good to go fast, and a man, if he be truly a man, no harm to go slow. For his glory is not at all in going, but in being.
Incidentally, these quotes that I'm putting on the screen are all being read by friends of mine who are living here in Austin. And part of what I'm trying to convey with having them read these quotes is that there's a very rich wealth of an international community right here in Austin. You need not sell everything and travel the world to rub elbows with people from all over the planet. Time to move on to Thailand, and this is what happens when you don't floss. One of the favorite sports to watch in Thailand is this Thai kickboxing, and they just beat the living daylights out of each other. Another question that I'm asked frequently is what kind of vaccinations or inoculations or medications am I taking on this trip? And the answer is none. I haven't taken any medicine whatsoever on this entire trip, other than I think I self-prescribed some antibiotics that I purchased in Southeast Asia over the counter for a sinus infection that I had. But knock on wood, I've been healthy as a horse for the last 2 months. This is a mahout in Thailand who is responsible for training and caring for this elephant. And it's a country where elephants are still used very much like we would use a pickup truck. They are working animals for sure. Another way that I got to say yes in the country of Thailand was one evening when I was standing on a rickety bamboo bridge. It was right at dusk, and I was trying to capture the last rays of the sun. And I heard a voice speaking to me in very heavily accented English. And when I looked up, there was a Buddhist monk standing there clad in saffron robes. And as it turns out, he was about my age. His name was Piak. And he was asking me what I was doing in Thailand. We were in a fairly remote area. And as the conversation continued, we ended up going back to the place where he was staying, which was this very sort of Spartan accommodation in a monastery. He was traveling around Thailand as well. And we got to talking. This is my friend Piak, and this is the bridge where we met. You can see that if you walk across that, you're liable to put a foot through the bridge. Anyway, we ended up chatting fairly late into the night. Monks don't stay up that late because they got to get up early. And I told him that my plan was to rent a motorcycle and ride around that part of northern Thailand for 3 days. And he said, well, I want to do that too. And I said, okay, well, do you have a driver's license? I mean, are you gonna rent a motorcycle? I mean, I don't know if they have a monk discount, but they're kind of a little bit pricey. And he said, no, I want to go on the back of your motorcycle. So for the next 3 days, I had my very own personal monk. And we saw some sights that I would never have seen had I been traveling on my own. It was just such a privilege to travel with him. These images that I'm showing you are some of the things that we saw in our travels together. And because of him, I had access to like this village, for example, where tourists don't frequently get to go. Incidentally, contrary to popular belief, these rings do not stretch the spinal column. What they do is they depress the clavicles, the collarbone. So it does cause a deformity, but it's not a lengthening of the spine. It gives the illusion that the spine is longer. Again, more shots of elephants. I like, isn't that cool? I just was introduced to Keynote, this application when I was putting this program together, and I like all these cool little transitions. But again, going back to the notion of focusing on details, especially when photographing objects or buildings or landscapes or people that have been photographed over and over and over again. How do I, as a photographer, get a unique take on something? How do I put my stamp on it? How do I make it an individual photograph that is something other than what anybody with a camera could take? More kids from the village that I visited with my monk friend. One funny little anecdote about that, and then we'll move on. I mean, we definitely wandered off the beaten path and met some other monks, traveling in the woods on these little paths that we were walking on. And on our way back to the town where we began our journey, I was pulling off the road to take in this beautiful mountain vista, and Piak was in my ear behind me saying, no, 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 no. And sure enough, right as I pulled off the road to take a look at this, the motorcycle slid out from under us. We weren't going very fast, but we were on gravel. And so, here's a 53-year-old monk and a 53-year-old not monk all tangled up together. And when I looked over at him, his his eyes were closed and he wasn't moving. And I thought, holy smoke, I've killed the guy. Where do you bury a monk? Because I didn't think I could, carry his dead carcass on the back of my motorcycle without a lot of people noticing. But as it turns out, he was fine. He was just meditating. So we thanks, I'll be here all week. I'm just making this stuff up. Anyway, I did get the shot, and he was fine. We had a few minor cuts and abrasions, and his robe got burned on the tailpipe of the motorcycle, burned a big hole in it, and so I had to pay for a new saffron robe. He wasn't willing to look for a used one on eBay. He really loved having his picture taken. It was so cool to, have my own personal model / monk for 3 days, and he would do pretty much anything I asked him to, and he really enjoyed having his picture taken. And we parted company on that very same bridge where we met. And several weeks later, when I was traveling in a different country, I was talking to a fellow traveler, and we were comparing notes about places that we had been, and she said, "Oh, have you been to the town of Pai in northern Thailand?" And I said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I had an amazing time while I was there." And she said, "We know that bamboo bridge." And I said, "Yeah, I was staying in a place on the other side of that bridge that was $6 a night." And she said, "Well, that bridge just got swept away in a big flood." So I don't know what that means exactly, but it sort of gives a magical, mystical quality to that episode.
I can't think of anything that excites a greater sense of childlike wonder than to be in a country where you are ignorant of almost everything. Suddenly, you are 5 years old again. You can't read anything. You have only the most rudimentary sense of how things work. You can't even reliably cross a street without endangering your life. Your whole existence becomes a series of interesting guesses.
Now, I told you that I had kind of a broom fetish, and before I left Thailand, I met these two beautiful blondes. Really swept my heart away. We're now moving on to the country of Laos, and having a camera, and I find particularly having a compact camera as opposed to something with a massive telephoto lens, is really a great vehicle for approaching people. It's not as intimidating as carrying around a massive camera with a 200 millimeter lens on it, and I almost never get turned down. I have gotten people in 23 countries to pose for me, and even if we don't speak a word of the same language, it's not too hard to communicate, "Can I please take your photograph?" I was riding a bicycle one day, and I visited a local temple, and there I bumped into a couple of other travelers, a fellow who was from the United Kingdom, and then another a crazy guy from Australia. Well, that's kind of redundant, I guess. But anyway, we ended up hiring a local guide, and we took a 2-day trip down the Oo River, which is where we are here in this photograph, and just had an amazing time. Incidentally, one of those guys, the English guy, and I ended up traveling together for about a week, and one place where we were staying, we turned in our laundry at the front desk, and when we came back to pick it up the next day, they had washed everything in bleach, including all of his expensive Columbia and North Face and Timberland gear that he had bought for the trip. He was quite upset, and they wouldn't even refund our $1.50 that they charged us for the laundry. I, on the other hand, continued wearing my tie-dyed clothing. It was just my new wardrobe. The guy behind the desk said, "We haven't ruined your clothes. We just gave you new colors." You know, I've nicknamed my trip around the world the Rompin, Stompin, Circus of Love Extended World Tour, and I was trying to hire this guy to be one of our acrobats. This kid would just do backflip after backflip on command, and this was the only one I got of him. I bet I had him do 50 backflips before I caught one like that. Another example of just trying to focus on tiny details, get a unique perspective on something, look for patterns. Sometimes I'm just drawn to a color. I mean, my photographs aren't really, I'm no rocket surgeon. I just try to look for simple things, and sometimes, just a pretty color is all I need to take a photograph. Bath time here on the Ooh River. Throughout my travels, I've been amazed by the interesting use of different materials that are used in building construction. This kind of a patchwork quilt of corrugated metal and wood. This is one of my absolute favorite pictures from my entire trip. And this grandfather and granddaughter were just placidly looking out of this window, and I'm pretty sure they would have just stayed there all day letting me take their picture. They never changed facial expression or pose. Here's the foot of a fellow traveler. This is actually taken in the back of a moving bus. Again, an attempt to just try to see subtleties in the light and to capture everyday mundane objects in a way that gives a fresh perspective and hopefully conveys a sense of a pleasing arrangement of the objects. And again, I like to convey a sense of just peace and tranquility in my images, even with just wash basins. Some monks walking on water. They levitated right after this.
It is to me the most exciting moment when you have a blank canvas and a big brush full of wet color and you plunge. It is just like diving into a pond. Then you start frantically to swim. So far as I'm concerned, it's like swimming in a baffling current and being rather frightened and very thrilled, gasping and striking out for all you're worth. The knowing eye watches sharp as a needle, but the picture comes clean out of instinct, intuition, and sheer physical action. Once the instinct and intuition get into the brush tip, the picture happens, if it is to be a picture at all.
I love how this quote speaks to the intuition that goes on in artwork, and I think in so much of life, if we will simply access that intuition. It goes back to what I was trying to communicate earlier with the internal compass. I think all of us have that intuition, and traveling by yourself for 2 years really helps you get good at listening to your gut.